Hey everybody out there in YouTube land, Jake of the OneManBand is back again, bringing you guys another RWBY episodic review. Not an episode today though, we got a World of Remnant video, and this is probably going to be the last one of the volume, and what a way to end it. I was waiting for this World of Remnant video for such a long time. We finally get a World of Remnant video about the Great War, and I'm so excited. We finally get to know how it went down, who participated in it, why it happened, and of course, what came from it. So we start out this video with Crow beginning to talk about the Great War and how it was a terrible time for the World of Remnant. I mean, that goes without saying. War is terrible. War is a very bad thing, and it's always going to be terrible. The war itself lasted 10 whole years, and that was on top of about 100 years of harsh tension between the kingdoms. I think the only reason this war would have lasted for 10 whole years is because that 100-year period with all the tension that was going on, each kingdom was poised on the brink of destruction, on the idea that war might happen at any time. So that's why they were poised. They were probably preparing for war, you know, not really wanting or willing to go to war, but were prepared to fight if they needed to. And that's why it led to such a long conflict. It's normally long and big tension gaps between nations that lead to longer conflicts because you're prepared for war, and one side just can't come in and sweep through an entirely other side because both sides are equally on each other's footing and equally prepared for war. So, according to Crow, the tension mostly started with Mistral. The Emperor of Mistral had most of the continent of Anima under his control. Due to low Grimm populations and an abundance of resources, they were a very strong empire. Yes, an emperor rules an empire. I don't know why it took me so long to figure that out in my head. So at that time, the Empire of Mistral controlled most of Anima and was just prospering. Not only were they mostly in a Grimm-free area and were high in resources, but they also had an alliance with the northern continent and kingdom of Mantle. Now, judging by the silhouettes that are shown of the leaders of each kingdom, we see that Mantle has a emperor, and he's very Eastern oriented, I think. A long flowing robe, sort of a beard. He looks like the Emperor of China from Mulan, to be honest. So definitely Anima is Eastern stylized, Eastern influenced. We already knew a majority of that, and Mantle is also very diverse in cultures, and we're not sure if that's how it was back then, but that's how it is currently in RWBY. Meanwhile, up in Mantle, we see mostly just a thickly built man with a fur coat. So I'm suggesting that they're very warrior-like, very practical. It almost sort of gave off the feel of either Vikings or maybe the Water Tribe from Avatar: The Last Airbender. That's what the Kingdom of Mantle that's how they rubbed me. That's how they sort of projected that's what they projected onto me by getting a look at their leader. And so this alliance between the M nations, if you will, Mistral and Mantle, flourished. Mistral would provide resources for Mantle that they did not have. Meanwhile, Mantle would provide Mistral with better technology and weaponry due to the fact that Mantle was more technologically advanced and had an abundant dust source up in the northern regions. So with these two big kingdoms in alliance with one another, this would obviously put Vale and Vacuo on pretty unsteady ground due to the fact that if these two decided to go to war with one nation, they could easily win. So that's probably why the tension was just so high between all the kingdoms, is because of this alliance. And if we look back to World War I, called the Great War, there was a lot of tension building up toward the war because of the introduction of alliances. Because alliances meant that if one nation decided to go to war with another nation, then the nation that's being attacked, they would be backed by other nations who are their allies. And thus, the one who is doing the attacking will have the back of their allies in the fight, thus creating world wars and the Great War, World War I. So although through alliances we are stronger, it breeds bigger, more destructive conflicts. But then something happened that I don't think anyone could have saw coming. A great cataclysmic event happened in Mantle, which caused the Mantle leadership to ban any expression of emotion. Now, when it's shown in the video, we see that Mantle is surrounded by Grimm. So, obviously, something so big happened in Mantle that a giant Grimm attack happened. Mantle was able to survive, but just barely. And thinking that if they were to ban all emotion and expressionism, then the creatures of Grimm would have a harder time being attracted to Mantle, because if there's no emotion, there's no negative emotion, meaning the creatures of Grimm wouldn't be attracted to the kingdom. Now, in order to keep their alliance, Mantle almost pushed this ideal on the kingdom of Mistral, the Empire of Mistral. Now, Mistral doesn't do what you think it would do. It doesn't say, no, we're going to continue to express ourselves, because in the World of Remnant video where it talks about Mistral, it's a very artistic land. It's a very artistic kingdom right now. And so it's also shown in this video that during the time of the Great War, they were also very artistic and just emotional driven. So does Mistral say, no, we're going to continue to express ourselves? No. Neither do they say, okay, it's completely banned. They do the worst, just asshole thing to do. They ban emotional expression in all the outlying regions of their kingdom, except for the capital itself. So where the emperor is, where all his, subjects are immediately right there, they're free to express themselves. They're free to, do art. They're free to express emotion. Everyone else, no. That's a very asshole thing, Emperor of Mistral. So they're all a bunch of jerks. We can all agree with that. And in this alliance, they just continued to push their agendas on other people and enforce slavery. These two kingdoms enforced slavery, which, although slave labor is cheap and efficient, it's still, human rights, and it's just not cool. Not cool in any way. Thus, we transition to the Kingdom of Vale. Mantle began to expand their influence and territory onto the continent of Salos, and this is the continent where Vale and Vacuo lie. Now, although it's on the easternmost reaches of the continent, it's still very close to the Kingdom of Vale. And so they're pushing their agenda on the people who are already there, because the settlers from the Kingdom of Vale had just started to settle there. So they're starting to push their emotionless expression on them, maybe even enforcing slavery on some of the denizens from the Kingdom of Vale. Now, try as he might, the King of Vale did not want to go to war with Mantle. He wished only to get along with one another. The King of Vale was a very wise man. He knew that if it bred to open conflict, the Grimm would then be as powerful as ever, and then it would be a war on two fronts, fighting Mantle as well as the creatures of Grimm. although his subjects cried out for him to do something, he was kind of held prisoner by politics. A lot how the leaders of the world of Remnant are held prisoner by politics in the current world of Remnant, right now in RWBY. But eventually, blows came to blows. A riot erupted into a full battle, and thus the Great War had officially began. Now, once the war had began, the King of Vale decided, I can't stop this. All I can do is fight now. So, Vale went to war with Mistral, and thus the Kingdom of Mantle was also brought in to defend their ally, to defend Mistral. And if we look at the picture that they use, Mistral comes charging in with muskets, while Mantle comes charging in with muskets, I'm sorry. Mistral has bows and arrows, Vale has kite shields and swords. Very similar to the kite shield and sword that Jean uses. And as we know, Jean's ancestor, great-grandfather, fought during the Great War. So that he was probably one of the frontline soldiers to be fighting during that 10-year conflict. Or maybe he was even an officer. But anyway, back to the whole Mantle charging in with muskets thing. Okay, so they have muskets. They have firepower. They have firearms. Okay. That doesn't mean that they're the only ones that have firearms, though. I mean, I'm pretty sure that eventually all the other sides got guns and stuff like that. But in 80 years, the humans of Remnant went from using muskets to having purse miniguns and grenade launchers. I know that it's only been 80 years, and I know technology moves fast, especially current day. But that just seems like a big leap. But as it says, during the war, technological advances in weaponry skyrocketed, plus there was an 80-year span of peace after the Great War. Now, for a while, it was just the Kingdom of Vale fighting off both Mantle and Mistral. The Kingdom of Vacuo just kind of wanted to stay out of it. They didn't want to go to war, they didn't want to fight at all. But the M nations kind of screwed up. As we see in the video, they kind of had embassies in Vacuo, and they were just kind of like, hey, this ain't your fight, just, don't do anything. This isn't your fight, just stay out of it. But eventually, it got to the point where it wasn't stay out of it. It was join us. You must join us. Now, this really tells me that the Kingdom of Vale is the most powerful of all the kingdoms, because they were able to fight off two kingdoms at the same time. And even though the entrance of Vacuo into the war probably helped Vale immensely, they were still able to hold their own for quite a while. Eventually, Vacuo had enough. They were done being talked down to, and they saw the logic that if Vale falls, they would be next, and they wouldn't be able to stop both Mistral and Mantle by themselves. And so, the Kingdom of Vacuo rose up, burned down the embassies of the M nations, and went to the Kingdom of Vale's aid. Now, let's talk about the silhouettes of the V nations right now. The King of Vale, we see that he's armed with a sword, and he also has a scepter that's almost like a walking stick. It's almost like a cane. Hold on to that, will you? And we see that he has long flowing hair, a crown upon his head, and he has a very, physically fit build. But he is like the picturesque form of a warrior king, and that's what he is referred to. He almost has a resemblance to King Ares the Second, I think, from Game of Thrones, but we know that he isn't crazy. The King of Vale was a very smart and wise man. He just looks the part of the warrior king that you would want to follow. Now, on the other hand, the leader of Vacuo is something completely different. Not only is she the only woman leader, but she is also a faunus. And I think this represents Vacuo perfectly. Vacuo is a place where the strong survive and the strong lead. If you are able to beat up the guy who's in charge of a village or a town or whatever, you're essentially in charge of that village, of that town. Now, there's probably some more politics nowadays, but Vacuo is very much a wild land, if you were. If you earn respect with people, they'll respect you back. And I think Vacuo is just very much a simple but more violent place. And this Faunus leader of Vacuo, I think, is just amazing, showing off how Vacuo is. I want to go to Vacuo in the next volume. That's where I want to go. So with the V nations fighting the M nations, war broke out everywhere. Everywhere villages burned, everywhere was felt the devastation of this war. There were instances where both sides would form alliances with each other to destroy Grimm that had come toward the battlefield. But it always ended with the two sides once again fighting each other. And while the best warriors and the biggest armies were out fighting each other, villages and kingdoms burned. They suffered during this war. And it went on for 10 whole years. Think how much secure the world of Remnant would be right now if that war hadn't had happened. There would have been countless more villages, countless more people, and who knows, maybe the villages that were on the Dragon continent wouldn't have been burned during the war, and there would actually be a structured settlement, maybe even a fifth kingdom up there. Now, the entire war came to its fruition with the Vacuo campaign. And the Vacuo campaign was pretty much the linchpin that would end the war. Either one side would win or the other side would win. The M nations knew that they were running low on resources and knew that Vacuo had a very large supply of dust, and so they pulled all their resources to take Vacuo. Now, the V nations caught on to this, and they knew that they had to stop the M nations. This would be the final battle. So, the King of Vale, the warrior King of Vale, decided he would lead his army himself. He wouldn't stay back to coordinate. He was probably at the very front of the charge. And with sword in one hand and scepter in the other, he charged the M nation's ranks and slayed countless enemies. The warrior king, he killed dozens, maybe even hundreds of warriors. That just shows how badass this guy is, how amazing he was at war, and how amazing he was in combat. Now, even though scholars would say that a bunch of differing conditions may have, swayed the battle to one side or the other, either way, it was the most destructive battle during the war. The countless amounts of lives that were lost bathed the sand red, and there were countless bodies scattered everywhere. I think it would be kind of cool as well as creepy, as during one of the volumes, maybe when our heroines are traveling to Vacuo, they come across a graveyard of countless bodies that fell during this war that were never properly buried and are now just piles of skeletons. That would be crazy. That would pretty much essentially be the Dead Marshes from Lord of the Rings, but in RWBY. God, that would be so freaking awesome to see the devastation of what that war brought, as well as giving us a really cool set of visuals. Now, once the dust settled and the battle was over, all of the leaders of the kingdoms bowed to the warrior king. The M nations were undone, and, well, I don't think Vacuo would have wanted to go to war with Vale after seeing their king kill countless people. So all of the nation's leaders bowed to the warrior king and essentially declared him the winner of this war. Now, could he have taken the entire world for himself? Yes, he could have ruled the entire world if he wished. But he didn't. the King of Vale was wise. The King of Vale was smart. He, with all the other leaders of the nations, met on the island of Vital and pretty much laid out a peace treaty. The entirety of the world would be banded together. We would all be in alliance with each other to fight the creatures of Grimm, essentially. Governments were restructured, slavery was abolished, and territories were redistributed, as well as the Faunus gaining their equal rights and the island of Menagerie for themselves. Now, this is the greatest part of this war, was the ending and how it ended. It ended with peace, with 4 individuals sitting down talking to one another. That's how wars end. And that's how essentially everything should end. It shouldn't end with punching, it shouldn't end with fighting, it should end with words and being steady of mind. Is there a time for war? Is there a time for battle? Yes, we saw that during this World of Remnant, but we also saw that after war, do not hold animosity, do not hold hatred in your heart, hold peace in your heart, and talk to your enemy. And that's a PSA for all those violent faunus out there. And then, after all was said and done, now I'm suggesting that with the redistribution of territory and the restructuring of governments, the governments of the 4 nations became Republican Democratic, where they had a council, maybe a senate, but I don't think they really had one person in charge of everywhere. They didn't have a warlord, they didn't have a king, they didn't have an emperor. Mistral might still have an emperor, but we definitely know Vale did not have a king in current day RWBY. They had a council. So not only did this warrior king give up the entire world to be redistributed amongst the people, he essentially gave up his crown. He gave up his birthright for the good of the world of Remnant and founded the Huntsman Academies, each in every capital of the world of Remnant. So the Warrior King of Vale was the predecessor to Ozpin, who built the academies on top of the relics left behind by the twin gods of darkness and light. The ruler of Vale, the King of Vale, was a wise man. He knew many things, almost like he had lived multiple lives. And so, the huntsmen that were birthed out of the Great War would be the ones to protect the world of Remnant. They would be the ones that wouldn't be tied to any nation, but be tied to its people, tied to fighting for justice and liberty for all. And God save America! Now, I want to address one of the biggest issues that I have seen with this World of Remnant video. Now, a lot of people in the community, as soon as they saw the Warrior King of Vale, instantly thought and screamed to the heavens, "That's Jean's great-grandfather! That must be his ancestor! He was the King of Vale! He was the one who led the charge and did the things, and that's how Jean got his sword and his shield was from his great-grandfather, who is the king." To which I say, no, you are wrong! Now, your mind is in the right place. Yes, the king did use a sword. And the soldiers of Vale used the kite shields and the swords like Jean does. Are there certain areas where this theory makes sense? Yes, I'll give you that. It would make a lot of sense, and in many cases, I would be believing it too. Jean, we have seen, kind of comes from a powerful family. If they could go on, camping trips to Shion Village, and if they could, do all this stuff, and each and every one of Jean's predecessors, his father, his grandfather, they were all heroes and warriors. So it would make sense. Well, okay, if his ancestor was a warrior king, it just runs in the genes. That would make a lot of sense. And it would also kind of influence my theory on how Jean is going to be the one who's going to rise up and be the leader of the, forces of Remnant against the forces of darkness. That would make a lot of sense. And I would 100% agree with the Jean's ancestor being the warrior king if it wasn't for one big, crucial thing, the king's scepter. It never states that the king of Vale fought with sword and shield. It doesn't say in the video, with sword in one hand and shield in the other, he slayed thousands. He slayed countless of warriors. It was with sword in one hand and scepter in the other. And if we take a look at that scepter, it's very similar. Very similar to one certain thing. Ozpin's cane. Now hear me out on this. The King of Vale was a wise and peace-driven man. He didn't want to initially go to war because he knew that the Grimm were out there. He didn't want to rule the entire world under an iron fist because that would breed animosity and more Grimm activity. He redistributed the territories and reformed governments because he wanted the governments to be better. And most importantly, he founded the Huntsman Academies so that they could keep the relics left behind by the gods safe. And who is the only person that we know knows about all that stuff? Ozpin. And Ozpin is the one who took over once the predecessor who built the Huntsman Academies passed on. What if the Warrior King was Ozpin's predecessor, not only in the being the leader of the Huntsman and its academies, but also in the soul transference? Once the Warrior King of Vale died, his soul then transferred to Ozpin, who then took control of the schools. Now let's take it back to Volume 1. Jean snuck his way into Vale. He snuck his way into Beacon Academy. Without any proper credentials, without any proper training, he was able to get in and stay in. Remember, Glinda, made note of Jean not being skilled enough and his transcripts looking wonky. But did Ozpin act upon it? No, he didn't. But wouldn't you think if Jean was the descendant of this warrior king, would he really need to fake credentials? Would he really need to do any of that? I'm pretty sure if he put on his resume, I am the great-great-grandson of the warrior king of Vale who killed countless people, they would let him in. No sweat. We'll do it for you. And don't you think he would have gotten more respect from people if he was the descendant of this warrior king? That's why I believe Jean's great-grandfather, whose sword and shield he has, was an officer during the war. If Ozpin's predecessor was the warrior king of Vale, maybe they fought side by side, and Ozpin, seeing Jean, knew who he was. He knew that he was the great-grandson of his old friend, and so he let him in and allowed him to stay out of respect, knowing that he would grow up to be a great warrior in time. Now, here's another thing that I want to talk about the scepter / walking cane. The scepter holds a striking resemblance to Ozpin's cane, and as we've seen in the one battle that Ozpin has with Cinder, he uses it as a weapon with blinding speed, blinding efficientness that only a warrior king might have. But we also need to think of the whole idea where the king of Vale slayed countless people during the Vacuo campaign. How might one be able to do that? He might be incredibly skilled, yes, but one man going up against 100 isn't going to win. We have made conclusions that Crow taking Ozpin's cane from Beacon was the relic. The cane is the relic, or the relic is housed within Ozpin's cane, and that's why he took it. Salem was after that relic, and now can't get it because Crow has it, or at least has hidden it. Now, if that cane is the same as the scepter, and we know that a relic is housed inside the cane, what if that relic is the relic of destruction? And the warrior king, knowing that the war had to end now, it had gone on for too long, finally took up the scepter of destruction that housed the relic of destruction, and using its power, slayed thousands of enemy soldiers, knowing that he had to end the war then and there, and though he didn't want to use it, he had to. And thus, he kept the destruction relic close at all times, both in life and in next life, with Ozpin having it. All in all, the theory of the origin of the Warrior King of Vale is up in the air. Can it be Ozpin? Yes. Can it be Jean's great-great-grandfather? Yes. But I'm leaning more toward Ozpin. That's who I'm thinking that this guy was. And with that, this World of Remnant video ends, and I'm so glad we got this one. It's answered so many questions, and it's just opened up a whole lot more, which is always amazing to have. Hey everybody out there in YouTube land, thanks for watching the video. I hope you guys enjoyed. Be sure to like and favorite if you did, and subscribe if you feel inclined to, and if you want to keep up on all the videos that I'm putting out. And hey, big thanks to all my Patreon sponsors. You guys are awesome, and there's going to be links down in the description taking you to my Twitter page and my Patreon page if you guys want to support me maybe monetarily, and there's also going to be links taking you to other videos that I've done. And until next time I'm out there in YouTube land, I want you to be a good person, tip your waitresses, keep moving forward, and I'll see you then.